Hello, everyone. This is the weekly Empty Cloud Monk Chat. My name is Ajahn Wade Buripano, and I'm joined by Ayawadha. And welcome to this live stream where you can type in any questions you want about Buddhism, and we'll do our best to answer them. And yeah, I guess I don't know if there's anything else to say. Why don't we get right into it? Okay. It's a long stream of questions already typed in, and we were thinking, actually, we should mention, we were thinking before starting that maybe what we should do is take one question per person until we work through everybody, and then see if we can take second questions from others if there's still time. So there's quite a long stream of questions already typed in, so we have to say that up front. And apologies to anyone who doesn't get their question answered. We do our best, and sometimes we give relatively long answers to some questions, and it may be because it's a question that seems fundamentally important. It seems like it would be fundamentally important to a lot of people, and so we might expand on it a bit, so that many people get benefit out of a thorough answer. Some of the questions we may answer more quickly, but it helps actually with the questions if you think through what you've typed in, how clear will it be to us exactly what you mean. So maybe I'll mention that as well. That'll help us be more likely to be able to answer your question when you type it in. All right. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'll read out the questions for us. We have a question from Chema Gomez, who asks, what motivates beings from multiple lokas to interact or make themselves seen by members from different realms? What types of interactions can a being have with members of a different loka? How would you like to start us?
Wow, what an interesting question. Right, okay. Not sure what I should say. Okay, so, well, maybe if we turn to the scriptures, if we turn to the suttas, it's a common source of information for those of us who interact with Empty Cloud Monastery. If we look at the suttas, we have some different things going on. For example, if we look at the Peta Watu, we have Venerable Sariputta, the foremost disciple of the Buddha in terms of wisdom, talking with ghosts and asking them about the karmic reasons that they are reborn as ghosts, and so in this way learning about the karma of these beings in that realm. And Mahamoggallana in the Vimanawatu, the stories of heavenly mansions, asking devas about their karma. How is it they've been reborn in such wonderful situations? Then we have also stories in the suttas about devas approaching the Buddha with questions. And so, for example, one of the most popular suttas from the Pali Canon is the Mahamangala Sutta, which is the discourse on protections or the greatest blessings. And Deva descends from a heavenly realm, and it says at the opening of the sutta that she illuminated the entire Jeta's Grove with her glory, with her radiance. And she bowed down low before the Blessed One and then asked him, Devas are concerned for happiness, and so are human beings. And so we'd like to ask you, what are the 32 highest blessings? And so, of course, then the Buddha gives us teaching on the 32 highest blessings. And it's a wonderful guide to life, you might say. It covers so many different areas of life. We also have devas who approach the Buddha and actually they've composed verses on Dhamma themselves, and they propose these verses to the Buddha for his approval, see what he says, and sometimes he responds with a correction, and sometimes he approves. And one of these that comes to mind is the verses of Tayana, a deva who did just the sort of thing. He descended from one of the heavenly realms in the evening, and he recited a number of verses that he'd written himself about the fundamentals of the holy life, the monk's life, you might say, or the monks and nuns' lives. And the Buddha sat with it all night, and in the morning he recited the verses himself again to the assembled monks, and he told them they should all memorize these verses and learn them because they pertain to the fundamentals of the holy life, and they were correct. And so now in Thailand, these verses are chanted after every Patimokkha recitation each 2 weeks. So it's just an example of this kind of an instance. There's one story in the sutras about a dewi, a female dewa who fell in love with a bhikkhu, and so she proposed to him and said, why don't you leave the bhikkhu's life, and we can enjoy romance, and he refused politely, and somehow he gave her a teaching. I forget what the teaching was, and I think she had a counter question. You remember all the details of the story, and he encouraged her to ask the Buddha, and he and she went to the Buddha, and she was able to get her question answered by the Buddha himself. So those are some examples. I wonder if you remember any others. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking there's so many, but there's one I was thinking of. When Sakka visits the Buddha, and he gives a teaching that no dhammas are worth insisting on. And then Sakka, he's the king of the 33, so he's kind of the king of the gods, you could say, of the sensual realm. And then he goes back up to heaven, and Mahamoggallana goes to visit him. And he sees Sakka is kind of enjoying himself with all the palace and the luxuries of heaven, and he sees that Sakka has become very negligent. And so then he asks Sakka, what was it that the Buddha was teaching you? And Sakka kind of says, well, have you seen these amazing palaces and these beautiful parks and so forth? And so Mahamoggallana kind of does a feat of psychic power and makes the building shake, and kind of makes Sakka realize the impermanence of it. So that was the question, what motivates beings? I was thinking in that case, it was almost for a teaching, similar to what Ajahn mentioned with Vimana and the Petavato. There was a kind of teaching. He tried to arouse a sense of urgency in Sakka in the story.
Good. Okay. Great example, sure.
Okay, Miguel Lewis asks, can samadhi meditation eradicate all anusia kilesa? Okay, well, so if I understand the question here, then I would say that the kind of maybe sort of technical answer would be that samadhi meditation itself can't eradicate the anusia kilesas. But samadhi meditation can be a foundation, a necessary foundation for the removal of them, right? Kind of like struggling to think of a direct example, but we need a supporting condition in order for the wisdom of the mind to be able to eradicate when you say anusia kilesa, for those also who don't know, anusia kilesa means underlying tendencies, or the defilements of the mind that are underlying it. So these tendencies, for example, we might not be experiencing greed, but maybe we encounter something and then greed arises immediately. And so it's almost like there was this tendency of the mind just floating there that wasn't active, but once the conditions are right, then it activates. And so, in the Buddhist path, the training, samadhi is the foundation for then wisdom. And so samadhi meditation itself, we wouldn't say that itself can eradicate the underlying tendencies, but we wouldn't also say that it's something separate from that, right? They're directly related. It's a condition. So, for example, the Buddha says, samahitang chittang yatha bhuta jnana dasanam. So the mind with the chitta with samadhi, the mind with samadhi, sees things as they have come to be, sees things as they are. So he kind of says that that's the condition. He also says that samadhi is the upanisa, the supportive condition for knowledge. So, and knowledge is what leads to freedom from the defilements. So you could kind of say that samadhi is the step that would be supporting the knowledge, and then the knowledge itself would be like the sword that cuts the defilements. Samadhi might be like what sharpens the sword, right? If you just have a piece of metal, then it couldn't. But if someone asked, well, could this metal cut through something very thick? Well, the answer is yes and no, right? The metal could, but it needs to be sharpened. So not the metal itself. So in the same way, samadhi is kind of the power that is a necessary foundation for the mind to be able to cut through the defilements.
Great. I was thinking about mentioning something to follow up to the previous question. I forget the person's name. Came up, but yes, Kema, right? Or Chema, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. But one of the reasons I paused at first is that these kinds of questions about beings from other realms, interacting with other beings and so on, and what motivates them. It's the question made me pause at first because, and I said I'm trying to think of what I should say, and it's because these kinds of topics are quite controversial, and they can even seem very superstitious to many people, And different monastics have different beliefs, and different teachers teach different things, and so on. And so that's why and so there's actually a vast amount of information in different traditions, from the teachings of different masters and in the sutras of different traditions as well, and it's quite varied, and different people have different beliefs about how much we should believe in them and so on, And so I thought, well, if I talk from the Pali Suttas, then that's something that we here at Empty Cloud anyway, it seems to be a common source of information, and a respected source of information, and so I felt kind of comfortable talking about that, and yeah, so maybe that put it more in context.
Okay, from Sarah asks, could you please provide some help with the piya vipayogo dukkha, separation from the beloved is dukkha? It's a lot of sadness to even think about it, let alone fully realize it. Okay. After some back and forth. Wait, sorry. Is this the same question?
Oh, maybe hard to see. Was there another one in between?
Well, right here, there's some dots.
Yes, right.
And then it says something about mudita meditation.
Well, it looks like a different question, right?
Okay.
Is this one? Oh, this looks like a continuation of the mudita question, right?
Yeah, it looks like separate. Okay. So maybe any reflections on this? It's sad to think about separation from the beloved is dukkha, or this aspect of dukkha, maybe? Reflections on that? Separation from the liked or the loved?
Let alone fully realizing it, yes, right. Well, so yes, it's yes, when we think that that one aspect of dukkha is being separated from what we like or what we love, and when we stop and recognize this, the reality of this, that that in our lives we're very frequently separated from what we want. And if we think about how frequent this is, it can be saddening. And if we think about very important things in our lives that we like or love that we no longer are able to associate with, for example, like the loved one has passed away, for example, or if one's had to leave one's country, for example, these kinds of things, it can be a little bit depressing to think about it. And the purpose of thinking about dukkha is to recognize that there is dukkha in the first place, and then in the second place, the prescription with regard to it is that the Buddha said that we should understand dukkha, and so we get in touch with the reality of this is what life is like here in samsara, and then seeing, for example, if we're experiencing sadness, seeing that the sadness comes up and what it's like, and learning how to interact with it. The sadness is initiated by our own hearts, and this is kind of a fundamental aspect of the Buddhist teachings, that when we experience emotional suffering, that emotional suffering is being initiated from within ourselves, actually, and it's not coming from somewhere else. And And even even really, it's not coming from this recollection, but rather the recollection is a simple statement of one of the real facts of life that we all have to deal with. And if we notice that we're turning and we're facing life here in samsara as it really is, then we can feel like, well, okay, this is difficult, but this is going to be good for me in the long run because I'm gaining a more realistic view of the way life is. And there are different methodologies for then working with the emotions may bring up. And different meditative methodologies. And so we can look into those and see what addresses the kinds of emotions we're experiencing. So, for example, some loving kindness meditation can be very helpful. Or if we have pretty good mindfulness, we can actually kind of just observe what's happening, so that the heart itself can see the kind of emotional response that it has to this reality, and see what this is like for it. Is this is this the kind of emotional response that we find is beneficial to us? Is this emotional response pleasant, or is it unpleasant? This sort of thing. And so we learn about our hearts, and the heart learns about its responses to reality, and all this kind of thing. And over time, there's an experience of growing wisdom and letting go, so that we experience some relief. And then when we experience difficult circumstances in the future, such as being separated from what we love, the heart will have a wiser and more mature response to it that entails less suffering and greater ease.
Thank you, Ajahn. Okay, question here. Is it okay to practice visualization during meditation, or it may create more fantasizing? Oh, okay. Well, maybe this is kind of a difficult question, because practicing visualization during meditation can mean many things. So there are meditative traditions and meditative practices where they do visualization. And even in the Theravada tradition, though it's not quite very common. But if I'm not mistaken, I haven't actually read this myself, so I've only heard it. But I believe that in the Visuddhimagga, which is a very revered text in the Theravada tradition, for a recollection of the Buddha, they actually recommend visualizing a Buddha. Is that true, Ajahn? Have you heard that?
Actually, I don't remember, but okay. I can certainly see it as part of the practice, at some stage or other.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, even in the Theravada tradition, there's sometimes visualization. And then once you start entering other traditions like Mahayana and Tibetan Mahayana, then there's many visualizations. And myself not having practiced those, I can't really comment on them. But so sometimes it can be helpful. But what I would at least personally recommend is that if you're going to be doing visualization, that you really have a teacher who's giving you very specific instructions and also feedback. Because the efficacy of it can start to become questionable if you don't have very clear guidance and very clear purpose for that type of practice, right? So something like mindfulness of breathing or metta meditation, really anybody can get benefit from it. And having a teacher is important, and it will help you. But if you just follow basic instructions, just being mindful of your breathing, and you don't go down too many dangerous kind of side roads with that, you can get a lot of benefit. You don't need very specific instructions unless you maybe experience problems in your meditation and so forth. But just being mindful of your breathing or practicing metta, even if it's not done very well, you probably will be okay. And you'll probably get benefit. But visualization, usually it can only really go well if you have very particular instructions with specific results and specific focusing ways of focusing the mind. And that really, I think, would only come from a teacher. Unless it's something like visualizing the Buddha. But even there, I'd be hesitant to suggest doing it without really clear guidance, because I think the mind can easily go, as you say, into fantasizing. And how much visualizing of the Buddha is really necessary, and to what extent, and how should we balance that with actually developing the feeling of faith and so forth. So I think there's a kind of a dance that needs to be done between allowing the mind to grow and just simply exercising the imagination, right? Those are really different things. So yeah, I would say it's okay to practice it, but I would really, if you're asking the question, my inclination would be to say that you probably shouldn't, because unless the teacher that you have contact with has given you instructions, then it probably isn't recommended. But maybe if there's a specific practice that you're doing, you could ask about that. You could ask for further clarification, and maybe the monks will have some kind of experience or advice that they could offer about working with that. But in broad terms, yeah, generally speaking, I would say not recommended without a very focused intent.
Actually, I wonder if I could do this twice in one night and backtrack to the previous question.
Okay. This one here?
It turned into a bad habit. I keep doing this. But it occurred to me in response to in thinking about Sarah's question a little bit more about the contemplation of that separation from what we love is suffering. That and she mentioned that it can bring up sadness. Just thinking about it is that if we're doing it as a contemplation, as an intentional contemplation, then if we're able to make the heart calm first, then you may have a different experience. You probably will, or you kind of should have a different experience where if the mind is calm first and then you contemplate it, you can go in kind of deep, and depending on how calm your mind is, the mind may be more balanced about it, and so you may have a different kind of experience that way. Yeah, so something to consider. If you're contemplating it before the mind is calm, and you notice that you get sad, you experience sadness and so on, you can try some of the meditation techniques I mentioned before. But you may also want to do it the other way around and see what kind of experience you have that way as well.
Okay, another question here. How to cope with people's misunderstanding due to a purposed defame attack? So maybe someone defamed you and then others are misunderstanding your character. Ajahn, did you have any?
Boy, yeah, okay, that's it's a tough one, and one of the things that comes to mind first is that there's a line in the suttas that says that no one in life goes unslandered, and so I think one of the first things that comes to mind is trying to recognize the normalcy of this. That within samsara, this is the kind of thing that happens to us. Just like kind of the other contemplation, that we are separated from what we love, and so people will misunderstand us from time to time due to perhaps slander or to any of a variety of different kinds of things, and we can find ourselves losing friends and our reputation damaged and things like this, and it can be quite painful. But that it's also kind of a normal part of life as well, that it happens to so many of us and perhaps everyone throughout the course of their lives, at least once. And so that's one thing to consider. I think another thing to consider is that the opinions of other people are not us and ours. That we have the kind of the formulation in Buddhist philosophy of not self, that kind of the most standard one anyway, is that which is impermanent is not ultimately satisfying, and that which is impermanent and not ultimately satisfying is not us and it's not ours. And we can reflect on this kind of a situation, that the situation and also the opinions of other people are transient. They came into existence, this kind of situation came into existence, and it didn't exist before, even though it was conditioned. And it's going to be constantly changing, and when you're in the middle of it, it may just seem terribly, horrible. And it may even seem like all of life is terrible. And your whole life is going to be terrible from here on out, and all kinds of things. It can seem really bad, but it's actually constantly changing and evolving. And one way or another, eventually it will come to an end. And if we can contemplate this, remember it, especially if we can work with making the heart calm, and for this it's very beneficial to have a meditation practice, then if we can contemplate that it's impermanent, and that it's not worth getting all caught up in emotionally, because it's not going to be satisfying for us. The situation in its nature, conditioned formations cannot be ultimately satisfying, because they're always changing and they're going to end. And that which is changing and is not ultimately satisfying, it's not really fit to identify with and think, this is other people's opinions are really true. They're really about me, and they are me and they're mine. And in the situation, defines me or defines my life or anything like this. And in this way, contemplating can let go and not take hold of it and buy into it so much emotionally. Those are two ways of thinking about it. I think it'd be helpful. You also can, if you can maintain your calm and not be reactive, that can be remarkably helpful in a situation like this. And if you can continue being, the really good person that you are, and try to be the best version of yourself, so that people see that consistently, and you can see how you can remind people calmly, very directly, but calmly and coolly, in an upbeat way about what kind of a person you really are. That can actually go a long ways. But if you let the situation rile you, and it brings out a negative side of you, then you can see how that could snowball in the opposite direction, and people start thinking their misperceptions are confirmed. And so you want to be cognizant of that and careful, alert to how you're acting and how it might feed into people's perceptions as well. Some ideas I have. I wonder if you have any additional ideas.
Oh, I think that was great, Ajahn. Very well.
Great. Okay. Well, we took one from Sarah already, or Sarah, perhaps it's pronounced. Wonder if we should apologize to Sarah and mention we were going to do one question per person. First run through.
I see what you. I thought you meant for us each, like one person answered. Each of us answered one, like instead of doing both. I see what you're saying.
Oh, okay. Well,
maybe I can give a brief answer. Just I feel slightly.
Sure.
Okay, so
we'll have to talk again before the next one, chat.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just give a very short answer. It looks like you're asking about your mudita practice, and that you feel blaming on yourself because you're not able to achieve the same. You feel failure because it's going dead end into your practice. And trying to be mindful does not help. You feel very lost. Could you please share some practical and detailed advice? I don't know about detailed because of the scenario here, but very briefly, what I would say is that if your meditation practice is reaching a dead end and you're feeling these kind of judgmental thoughts and you're feeling down and all of that, is to really remember that most people don't meditate at all. They don't have any kind of mudita practice. So the fact that your mudita practice is reaching a dead end means that it even had an end to reach in the first place is amazing, right? You can recollect that. So the fact that you've even practiced this and that you're even upset, even in the slightest way, that it's not going as well as you would have hoped, is a sign that you have a strong sense of importance for spiritual practice and a strong sense of urgency and a dedication to doing wholesome behavior, right? Because most people, they wouldn't be doing mudita practice, and if it didn't go well, they wouldn't care that much, and they it's just not part of their life. So the fact that you feel such a strong push to do this practice well is a really good sign. And I would just say none of these negative thoughts will help you. They're not part of the practice. So we just put the conditions in, and then for changing the mind and for developing our heart. And we don't need to think about, it's not going as quick as I wanted, or I wish it was going better. We just look, is there something I can do that would help this? And we do our best to contribute those results, and then we just rejoice in our own goodness, and that should help your heart brighten and your practice go well.
I wonder if I could offer a couple of other ideas. I think that's really good advice. I wonder also some different focus to the meditation practice. If you take the focus off what other people are accomplishing, and on the one hand, you could take the focus off what other people are accomplishing and focus on the inspiring theme of the good things that you have done. Not perhaps worldly accomplishments, but things in relation to your spiritual practice, for example, like acts of generosity and acts of service, and the kinds of precepts that you keep in your spiritual life, and the principles that you live by to live ethically. If you have a meditation practice, reflect. For example, of course you do. You see, you're trying to practice mudita, and so reflect on the fact that you do meditation practice, and any other kinds of meritorious things you do, and you can work with this, calling these to mind, remembering this is something good that you've done. This is an inspiring theme that helps the mind to collect. The mind naturally likes to collect around this kind of theme, a contemplation. And it's one that can uplift us and boost our self-confidence and our perception of ourselves in terms of what we've done already. And it's quite gladdening. Other inspiring themes, of course, are the recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and the recollection of the Devas. And so those are other kinds of contemplations you can look into as well. If you do find yourself being preoccupied with other people's accomplishments, you can actually contemplate those accomplishments themselves in terms of the three characteristics. I was talking about those just a moment ago in relation to the to being defamed, for example, and the situation of finding yourself being slandered. And it can be also turned on the accomplishments that other people have made. Whatever accomplishments they have are impermanent, and whatever satisfaction arises from them is also transitory. They won't be ultimately satisfying, until we attain enlightenment. That's the kind of achievement you have to make if you want to be, satisfied perpetually. If we consider, the analogy of the achievements we've made ourselves in the past, whatever accomplishments we have, and see, well, did it bring me, everlasting happiness, and how transitory was the satisfaction? And these kinds of contemplations about their impermanence and their unsatisfactory nature can help you to let go of those accomplishments. So those are two different ways of looking at it. It may be easier to do that kind of a wisdom contemplation. It usually is. It should be easier to do it once you've made the mind calm. And so you may want to try. You may go back and forth between something like a wisdom contemplation like that and the practice of an inspiring theme, or you may start out with the inspiring theme or some other methodology that helps you make the mind calm, and then look into those kinds of accomplishments with wisdom.
So, John, did you want to do that still, or should we?
Now
that we're understanding, do you think that's it? I'm okay with that as well. I just didn't understand it first.
Sure, okay.
Okay.
I guess we have to think about the time. It's 8 o'clock. We go for an hour, or another hour, I should say. We go to 9. We're trying to figure out if we should go with the idea of just doing one question per person until we work through everybody. So we're looking at how many questions there are here and how much time we have left.
We'll say there's not so many. We could do it.
Think we can do it? Okay.
Okay.
We'll see if we can do them all the way through. All right.
If things start going wrongly, then we can speed it up. Maybe is that a good idea?
Okay. Or speed it up. Okay.
I mean, we can skip and then go back.
Oh, okay.
If that works for you.
That's cool. Yeah.
Okay. Flower asks, about the first noble truth, is it possible that some people are very sensitive to sufferings while others are completely not? If a person is not sensitive to sufferings at all, would he be always living a very happy life? There are definitely people who are much less sensitive. And I think as you continue your practice, you'll meet them, right? They hear about suffering and they just don't seem to care or to get it at all, right? The whole idea of Buddhism, it's just completely uninteresting to them. Or the idea that, life is of this nature. It's just, they just don't, their mind doesn't leap to that, right? Usually the answer is something like that, well, actually sadness is part of what makes happiness meaningful, right? And these emotions are a part of life, and we don't want to let them go, right? We want to be sad and we want to be depressed and lonely because those things make our life colorful and meaningful, and they give meaning to the other emotions. So that type of response, I think certain people, they seem inclined to it, at least in my experience. And then other people, they don't seem inclined to that response. And other people, they change. Nobody is fixed in this way. So some people, they might be more sensitive to to suffering, I think we could call that maybe Sangvega, kind of a sense of spiritual urgency in the world, a sense of also disillusionment and wanting to somehow find a way out, right? And they might be very misguided, and they might not necessarily know the path or be convinced even of the path, but they, some people I think definitely have that. And other people, I think they're more sensitive, but sometimes in a not so skillful way, right? There are people who suffer from maybe some kind of chronic depression or negative thinking where everything seems very grim and bleak and dark and gray, and they can't seem to get the joy in life. And so you could say that they're very sensitive to the suffering, but those types of thoughts, if we find ourselves falling into them, they're not so much wisdom in the First Noble Truth, right? They're more a kind of partial or near enemy of wisdom, which sees the drawbacks but doesn't have a balanced picture to be able to be equanimous and find a joyful and more freeing escape, right? It just kind of gets stuck in the mud. So yeah, I would say there are some, but I wouldn't concern yourself too much with it, right? We just do our best to wherever we're at, and we try to grow from there. So living a very happy life, I wouldn't say that that's a result from not being sensitive, for example, to the First Noble Truth, because obviously the happiest life that someone could live is if they were enlightened. And in that case, they would need to be fully sensitive to the First Noble Truth, not ignorant of it or ignore it intentionally. And so the people who ignore it intentionally, they might seem very happy, usually because they tend to be focusing on the gratification of life. So they tend to be focusing on the joy that they can get out of it, right? And so it might seem like, well, if we just don't think about it, it's not a problem. If we just focus on the good parts and kind of just ignore the bad aspect, then it seems like those people don't have a problem, right? But I would say that's not the best way to think about it, because it's a kind of way of cultivating delusion. And so then when the suffering, there are certain aspects of life which when suffering comes, we cannot avoid it. One of them Ajahn was talking about. So, being defamed, for example, or slandered. Life might seem very joyful, and then it turns out that you're slandered and you maybe have horrible changes in your family and work life and everything else, and it can't be avoided. Or death, very tragic death, right? People who tend to enjoy life, when those deeply loved and treasured parts of life are taken from them, they don't have a refuge, right? They weren't ready for that type of experience. So, and this also could be any of us here. So I'm not saying this in a judgmental way, but it's just something that we should be aware of, that whether we have a tendency to not so much focus on the bad parts, or we have a tendency to be very focused on the negatives, both of those are places that we grow from, right? And you could say that one of them is a tendency more towards greed, and one of them is a tendency more towards aversion. And other people, they're not so sensitive to the suffering, and they're also not so sensitive to the positive. They're just a little bit spaced out. And those we would say are more in the delusion camp, right? They tend to just be caught up in their own mind and their own thoughts and thinking and imagination and so forth. And so all of us have, most of us, or probably all of us have all of these, right? And so it's just a matter of balancing them and noticing, okay, when my mind is really not seeing the suffering, I don't need to make myself suffer, but I can incline my mind towards seeing the drawbacks. And when my mind is very focused on the drawbacks and feeling very down, I can incline my mind towards maybe some of the spiritual joys in life, right? Not the things that would increase greed, but some of the spiritual joys that might motivate you to find happiness, right? And if we're very deluded, then we can focus on the clarity, focus on just developing clarity and what are the drawbacks of delusion. It doesn't feel good to feel confused and foggy, right? So those are some of the things that we can do. And if we notice other people, I think also this was addressed very well in terms of the mudita, right? In other people's accomplishments. So if we feel, oh, that person seems very, very happy, they don't seem to be bogged down by these Buddhist reflections on suffering, then we can reflect, oh, well, on one hand, we might be happy for them, that they're happy, but on the other hand, we could reflect, well, their happiness is not so stable, and through this practice, I can develop a more stable sense of happiness. or the happiness that they're getting is very maybe makes the mind very restless, and so we can incline the mind towards a more peaceful happiness. So you can reflect on the drawbacks of the type of happiness that comes from pursuing certain thoughts in other people. Okay, and Lydia, looks like a related type of question. I can't figure out the gratification of a disturbing thought, I think, that I can't let go. Any advice?
Okay. You mentioned gratification, something you mentioned earlier as well, right? And, this is going back to some teachings in the suttas about noticing being aware of the gratification, the danger, and the escape, as I recall. And the Buddha talks about the gratification, the danger, and the escape in sensual pleasures. And then in what other? Was it in becoming? In non-becoming? I wonder if you might recall.
He talks about it for almost every framework that I can think of, with the aggregates and the senses and the sensual pleasures and form, I believe. And
Okay.
I think there's many, I think almost every that I can think of, many of the.
Right. Okay. But okay.
Maybe you're thinking of something that I'm missing.
No.
Something on a specific list.
No. I don't know. Oh. I don't know much about it. So I remember the graphic metaphor about or a teaching on the gratification, the danger, and the escape from sensual pleasures. But on the rest of it, I don't remember.
Yeah. I think I know what you're thinking of, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it was. I'm sorry, I won't distract your answer. Can't remember the exact. I know what you're thinking of. There was a list of 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm not sure if I understand where your question is coming from, Lydia, about the gratification of a disturbing thought. But I don't know of a teaching about that there would be some gratification of disturbing thoughts that we would be looking for or trying to figure out. It may be that there's a teaching that there's gratification in thinking, So sometimes we may have thoughts we find very pleasing, that the thoughts are a kind of sensual, can be a kind of sensual pleasure, and so the Buddha would tell us, well, you may have sometimes experienced thoughts that, and in fact, not all thinking is completely, completely full of suffering. There can be some gratification in thinking. But also you should recognize that there's danger in thinking also, in the sense of that there can be suffering in it. So it looks like this is one example of that, if you're having a disturbing thought. And so the teaching on this is about not getting all caught up in things, thinking like, for example, that sensual pleasures are really wonderful and to be chased after, because even though they have some gratification, there can be some gratification found in them. There's also a downside to sensual pleasures, and they're not ultimately satisfying. And so similarly with something like thinking, we can find some pleasure in thinking and some benefits in thinking, but not to get all caught up in thinking that all thinking is great or something like this. But recognizing there can be a downside to this. If we can master the mind, then we can even we can start thinking the kinds of thoughts that are skillful, and reduce and eventually eliminate unskillful kinds of thoughts. And so noticing the gratification and then the danger and the escape would help us to do this. If we notice, first of all, there are kinds of thoughts that are dangerous to us. For example, when the Bodhisattva was trying to attain enlightenment, Siddhartha, was trying to attain enlightenment, he noticed that different kinds of thoughts would come up, and some of them were not conducive to the kinds of practice he was doing. They led him down an unskillful road, and other kinds of thoughts were more skillful, more conducive to skillfulness. And so he said, why don't I separate them and categorize them? And he said that and from now on, I'll recognize that when I start thinking thoughts of ill will or of cruelty or related to sensual pleasures, I'll not follow them, and I won't encourage them, and I'll try to let them go and move into skillful areas of thinking that would be more beneficial to me. And so with this, when we have a disturbing thought, we can notice, this is disturbing and this is suffering. And we can and use this kind of a methodology as one idea of how to let it go. Oftentimes, the mind is churning up things, such as difficult emotions and difficult thoughts, precisely because it actually doesn't realize that these kinds of experiences are unpleasant. It can be quite a surprise to us, to us when we learn this. If we examine the heart, if we get closer to it, and we practice with it, that actually the heart can be quite naive about a lot of the activities it engages in, and about many of the things that it chases in life, including the emotions it generates and the thoughts that it makes for us. And so, if we're experiencing a disturbing thought over and over again, we can notice, well, I'm having this thought, and this is unpleasant. And we may find that that's enough for the heart to let it go, and we'll keep generating it. And if it comes up a little bit more, we can try again. If we find it especially difficult, if the mind's kind of persistent in generating this, then we may need to try to take some time to make the mind calmer, so that the heart can really notice better what it's doing. And so we might practice some breath meditation, for example, or something like this. And slowly, as we're making the mind calmer, and we notice these thoughts coming up, and making the mind, and coming back to the breath, making the mind calmer, and then go back and notice the thoughts coming up, that the heart then may slowly come to realize that this thinking, these disturbing thoughts are quite unpleasant, and then be able to let it go that way. Sometimes it can be a long practice. It takes time to learn these kinds of things and undo old habits, and so it requires some patience as well. But in the long run, we become kind of stronger inside, and we become wiser also. And so if we remember that while we're being tried by difficult thoughts and difficult emotions, that can kind of buoy us up and make us feel better about it, that in the long run, this will be good for us and we'll grow.
And good evening, Mary. We have a greeting from Mary.
Oh, great. Good evening, Mary.
So I have another question here. This morning, Rob from England said he was going to stay at a monastery for 6 weeks, his longest retreat. Do you have any advice for him? Oh, do you know Rob from England, John? I don't know. No? Okay.
Okay.
I don't know who Rob from England is, but well, it's probably several of them. But any advice for his week? I suppose he's still watching. Maybe he's watching, or but I guess my advice would be that he. Well, I don't know Rob from England, but maybe generally speaking, when he's at a monastery, to just use the opportunity to learn. Not to observe and to follow the practices there, and to really try to absorb the atmosphere, like opening the mind. Not trying to expect so much from it, not trying to push his own ideas onto how it should be, or how the rules or the schedule or the monks or the building or whatever should be, but thinking that he's going to have an open mind and he's going to really get the best out of this, right? Like learn from the best qualities, and things that he finds difficult, he's going to take those to learn from them. Maybe things that he even things he doesn't like, he can learn from those, right? Learn, I like it. I can learn how to work with this, and then how to maybe what he doesn't want to repeat, right? There was a monastic who said something like, whenever you meet a senior monastic, you should never judge them. You should just learn what you want to be like and what you don't want to be like, instead of judging, like what, them. And I think that's really good advice for actually everything, right? Whenever we not just, persons, but also when we go somewhere, we don't need to judge. We just need to learn what we like and how we can grow, and also maybe what we don't want to be like, but with an open mind, not so quick to say, I don't want to be like that, or I don't like that, because sometimes we really block ourselves off. So that's my advice, at least. Maybe Ajahn, you have some advice for visiting monasteries and retreats?
Well, that's really good. That's really good, I think. It's a general kind of advice to give. It reminds me of a metaphor I've heard over the years a few times in Buddhist circles. And I don't know if it's only in Buddhist circles, but when we go into a new place, we want to be like a bee, like a honeybee, and not like a fly. And and the media hearing chuckles already, so I think people know this one. The honeybee. What does a honeybee go to when it goes into a new place? Well, it looks for the flowers, the things that are beautiful. looks for flowers, which are really beautiful. You know, where do flies go? And so it's quite a graphic reminder. Yes. Okay. So what is it that we focus on? And so yeah, in keeping with Ayawada's advice, that's a metaphor I remember came to mind, the teaching. So I think it's a really good one to have when you're going to a monastery.
Okay. So still doing pretty good. Maybe we'll continue with this, even though it's repeat. Click too many questions. If the first noble truth needs to be fully understood and the third noble truth needs to be fully realized, what is the difference between understood and realized here? Thank you.
Okay. So the first noble truth is that there is suffering, and the Buddha, he on his while he was trying to attain enlightenment, he noticed this suffering is reality, and the suffering, you know, this reality of suffering is to be understood. He thought that was he saw that was the pathway to overcoming suffering and attaining enlightenment. The second noble truth is that the cause of suffering is tanha, which which literally means thirst, but is usually translated into English now as craving. And he said, in this reality of the cause of suffering being craving, is you know, this craving should be abandoned. And then the third noble truth, that this there's a cessation of suffering. It's nirvana. It's the absence of this craving. You know, you get rid of craving, the suffering will cease. And he said what he realized what he should do is that I should realize the cessation of suffering. And then he said, and then he came upon the fourth noble truth, the path to the end of suffering, and it was the Noble Eightfold Path. And he said to himself, you know, this Noble Eightfold Path should be developed. And that's what you should do in regard to the reality of this path. And so, and it is the development of the path that you know is that leads to the realization of nibbana. And so, and part of the path is coming to understand suffering. You know. And so, just as you're going through with, you know, sorry, you asked the question earlier about having difficulty with mudita practice and experiencing some suffering with regard to, you know, other people's accomplishments and your own accomplishments and so on like this. And I gave some advice about meditation, you know, and I want to give some advice as well. And this is all about, these are ways of kind of coming to terms with the situation and making the mind calm, letting go of these kinds of accomplishments and so on like this, which forms part of the pathway in the long run of being able to make the mind calm, so you see quite clearly, you know, suffering and how it arises and how it goes away, and how we cause suffering, how our own hearts cause suffering for us in terms of the desires and the urges it generates. Yeah, so maybe that makes it clear. And then so going through this process of understanding suffering, and then how to remove craving, you know, abandon craving, that then will lead to the realization of the cessation of suffering, the third noble truth.
We have some greetings from some more friends here. And okay, here's a question. Whenever I recite anicca in my meditation or look around with anicca in my mind, I find myself being saddened. Is it normal or just a state of my mind? Oh, interesting. Okay, looking around with anicca in your mind. Well, this is interesting. It also came up, I think, recently, Ajahn, with your answer about saddening with the reality of dukkha. I don't know how many people made the connection. Maybe it's obvious to you, but anicca, it's part of the first noble truth. It's kind of an aspect of dukkha. It's an aspect of suffering, and also how we arrive at the idea of suffering, or the reality of suffering. And so being saddened by anicca, it's just another way of saying being saddened by suffering. And of course, of course we're saddened when we see suffering, right? We don't like that. So I think that's the best way to think about it. Of course, it's sad to think about also the specific instance that was mentioned before is separation from what we like, and that's also really a manifestation of anicca, right? When things that we like and love are changed and separated from us, that's anicca. That's an aspect of how suffering is born of anicca. So when you look around and you find yourself, is it normal? And so is it normal or just a state of your mind? And the answer is both. It is just a state of your mind, and it's also normal. Because the mind, these types of states of the mind are normal. And so how do you work with it? I think actually this was maybe addressed, because it was probably sent in, it was sort of addressed with the other questions as well, of being saddened by dukkha and being saddened by losing things that we like, and coming to terms with suffering in the world, and also the path to be developed and so forth. So I think that maybe your question was addressed, and if you have any more specific aspects about it, then we could talk about that. So maybe just the one brief comment that I would add in addition is that if you really find difficulty because you're reciting anicca in your meditation, you could set that aside. And as was also mentioned, you could just focus on developing calm instead. And then maybe you could contemplate anicca. But you don't need to recite it, especially if you notice a pattern of it. It just makes you sad, because that won't help you actually understand it. It'll be a block. So there's no need to kind of maybe pressure yourself to think, oh, I need to recite anicca because I'm a Buddhist, or this is the real meditation or something. Actually, no, you can allow your mind to grow and build strength through just calming the mind, and then you can return it and see how that goes. Okay, so here's a question. When trying to understand the nature of a thought, i.e. pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, sometimes I find that a pleasant thought can actually mask as an unpleasant one. Any ideas on how to better understand your thoughts and not to get fooled by this?
Oh, this is complicated. Okay.
So, pleasant thought is masking as an unpleasant one.
Okay. I'm trying to think of an example in my own life. This is I apologize, wise man. Don't take it. Give me applause. I can't think of a time when I've experienced that. A pleasant thought is masked as an unpleasant one. So I'm experiencing a thought as being unpleasant, but then at some point realizing that actually it's a pleasant thought. Okay. And so, okay, I'm trying to think. I imagine what you mean. I apologize, wise man. I'm trying to understand. Maybe what you mean is that that actually kind of the content of the thought. So you're thinking about something. Initially, you think it's something bad or something you don't like, but then realizing that that actually what you're thinking about is actually a positive thing. And that I can certainly relate to. And so maybe hopefully I understand what you're meaning, and I'm not going off track, but so yes, and okay, so in this would be an indication. You see, when we see something that's kind of that's actually a positive thing, or something that's uncertain is kind of neutral or uncertain, either one. And we have some kind of negative thoughts about it, or we think that it's bad or something like this, then that's a sign that our mind is affected by the kilesa of aversion. Dosa, usually translated as aversion now, sometimes translated as hatred, but I like the category, the translation of disliking. In this case, it'd be good to pay attention to if you notice a trend like this, if this is a relatively common thing for you, if you happen to notice, like, okay, I have a tendency to see kind of the negative side of things. How things are kind of insufficient, or they should be improved, or this should be changed, or in some way or other, that the way things are kind of I'm seeing them in kind of a negative way. Then that might be an indication that you have a tendency towards this aversion. They say that each of us has kind of what's the right way to put it? Like we have a kind of a personality tends towards one kind of defilement or another. So you might hear the terminology like so-and-so is a greed type, or so-and-so is a delusion type. And you can even be kind of a mix of multiple types. So-and-so, it could be a hatred and delusion type, kind of thing. And getting to know kind of your tendency, getting to know more about your personality can help you understand, your experience, as you're going around and doing things. It also can help you to understand how to remedy it, perhaps with a regular meditation kind of theme. So, for example, those who find that they do typically kind of see the negative in life or see things in a negative light, have this tendency towards aversion, might practice loving kindness meditation as a regular practice, and find this to be a tremendous relief over time if they get used to practicing it and are able to practice it skillfully. And then find that over time that their perceptions become more balanced, so that their heart is less likely to generate a negative thought about something, and may actually more likely to see the positive aspects of things. So maybe that's something I can offer on that.
This is interesting. Greeting. Okay, kindly elucidate for us all on Pariyati, Patipati, Pativedha. Thanks. That's
And your name starts with P. Your name is P.
I don't know exactly what this means. Maybe because it's kind of, you could think of it as like the whole path, but maybe you mean like the meaning of the terms or how they relate to each other.
Yes.
So pariyatti means studying. And patipatti means practicing, right? So you might know this from like Majjhima Patipada, right? The middle path that avoids the extremes of indulgence in pleasure of the sense or pain of the senses. And then pativedha means like a realization or, realization. So generally speaking, the way that this is kind of talked about, I believe that this is from the commentaries. It's a kind of commentarial way of breaking down the path, right? So it's a kind of useful scheme for thinking about our practice. And pariyatti, we say, is first we study, right? We need to study in order to know what we're doing. Kind of like, you could think about it if you want to go to Bodh Gaya. And so you think, okay, I'm going to walk to Bodh Gaya. But you don't have a map, and you don't even know where Bodh Gaya is. You don't even know if it's in the south of India or the north of India, or if it's in Gujarat or where it is. But you want to go there. So you have this idea, this name Bodh Gaya, but you don't know anything about geography. You don't know anything about how to get there. You don't know anything about travel. So first you need to maybe get a map, and you need to learn some about the geography and learn about, okay, where am I in relation to this place? And maybe what is the route that I need to take? Maybe there's some mountains you need to go around. And so you need to study and you need to have an idea of where you're going. And we could think that this is maybe before GPS. So you don't have a device that will tell you every step of the way. So you have to kind of study and learn the territory, right? But if you put the map down and you walked on it, you wouldn't get to Bodh Gaya when you stepped on the area that said Bodh Gaya, right? You would just be walking on the map. So the map, we say, is not the territory. So once you study the map, then you have to start walking, right? You have to practice. And you might even need to make some mistakes. So you might need to follow, and then you realize, oh, wait, I took the wrong turn there. And maybe actually the map is a little bit wrong. It's a little bit messed up, or you misread a spot, or there's a stain on the map. And so you kind of practice, and you start to walk. And you start to notice how certain landmarks correspond to the map, right? So maybe you see, oh, wait, this part on the map, it actually corresponds to this real place that you're seeing on the land. And so you could kind of relate to this metaphor of if you connect a spot on the map that you've studied and an actual spot in the land that you're making progress towards, that would be like equivalent to a type of realization, right? Because you realize, oh, there's a correspondence between what you studied and what you've actually realized. And so, but this, you notice that this is still not Bodh Gaya though, right? So then you keep walking and you have these mixture between, okay, looking at the map, assessing it, studying it, practicing walking, and then, realizing that maybe you've reached a certain destination. And then finally you might reach Bodh Gaya, right? So in the same way, in the practice, there's this general movement from studying and learning how things should go and what you might need to do, and then practicing and running into errors and kind of innovating and learning and taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And that's the practice stage. And then there'll be certain landmarks that if you reach those landmarks, that would be like Pativeda. It's like a realization that you can have for yourself, right, of the landmarks. And then obviously what the realization really means is the realization of enlightenment, or the stages of enlightenment that come from as the fruits of the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so, yeah, these really, they go together, right? If someone, there was actually, I did a retreat once, and it was kind of funny. It was a little bit awkward. Is that after this person, he said to me that he had a realization during meditation, or maybe, I don't know exactly if he worded it like that, but he said he realized something, and he said that he realized that meditation doesn't work. Yeah, he said he realized meditation doesn't work, and he said that when Hindus meditate, when Christians meditate, they see God, and when Hindus meditate, they, see Brahman, and when Buddhists meditate, maybe they see this or that, right? So he said that he realized that meditation doesn't work. Everybody they just think that they're experiencing the goal of their own ideas, but really they're not. They don't seem to actually be, none of them are actually right or really getting to a particular specific destination or anything. Seems like it's just whatever you believe, and then you do it, and that's what you end up seeing, right? So that would be kind of an example of the importance of study, but also the danger of study, right? So if we put too much emphasis on study, we might think that the map is the territory, and then you meditate and you think that you've realized something which really is just confirming your own biases and beliefs. But at the same time, if you haven't studied, then you might just end up seeing something and you think that that's something that it really isn't, right? So an example of this would be the Buddha's former teachers. They thought that they had reached enlightenment or freedom, but and then some people that are Buddhists, they might even make the same mistake, right? They might reach some kind of stage of meditation, and maybe they think that they're enlightened. But then maybe they read the Buddhist text and they do talk to a teacher, and it turns out actually they've just reached some stage of meditation. Like there is someone also who, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it's very common for people to experience a state of meditation and then think that it's some kind of stage of enlightenment, but actually they just had some meditative state. So if they studied and they talked to teachers and they learned the map, they might know, oh, this is maybe just that stage on the territory. It's not actually the final goal. So that's kind of the importance and the interaction between study, practice, and steps. Okay. Maya asks, is right view something that is attained all at once, kind of like an epiphany, or is it more like a gradual realization? Can one have right view only sometimes, or is it all or nothing?
Right. Okay. So the one finally attains, really attains kind of permanently, you might say, right view when one attains the fruit, the path or the fruit of Sotapanna. I can't say I know which. The path and or fruit of Sotapanna. This is because the Sotapanna has by attaining the path and fruit has made the mind calm and gone through all the learning stages that are traditionally called the insight knowledges. And so they've seen clear, and then and then at the end of kind of the very end of the insight knowledges, what they do is they let go of everything and then experience nibbana. The mind is unbound, released into nibbana, and then they come back. But they've had the experience of the third noble truth, so they've had the experience of all four noble truths, and so then they really know, okay, there is suffering. The cause of suffering is tanha, and there is a cessation of suffering, this nibbana, and I just walk the path to it. And so the Four Noble Truths are right, and this is called attaining to right view. When the practitioner finally gets it permanently. However, there is a kind of a gradual aspect to it also, as we learn through life in kind of our more through our meditation, through our normal experiences, by paying attention to how we experience suffering in life and how much of it we generate from within ourselves. And that through a process of letting go, keeping precepts, practicing meditation, growing in wisdom and letting go, that we do experience some relief from suffering. We don't experience nibbana until we go walk that full path that I talked about before. But we can get a sense for things, and a sense for the validation of or the validity rather of the Four Noble Truths. And so in this way, there is kind of a gradual understanding of right view. So I think maybe that answers it. That's talking about it in terms of what is it? Transcendent right view, the right view that leads beyond the world to nibbana, which is the Four Noble Truths. You could say with regard to other aspects of right view, the mundane right view, that some of it you kind of you can some people just kind of feel is right, and they have a lot of faith in. This is one aspect of having right view. For example, the faith that there is this world and the next, which is one aspect of mundane right view. But to actually really know that there is this world and the next, you really have to see it for yourself. And so this would be another way where you really have to become proficient in meditation to see something like that. Another aspect of mundane right view is that there are consequences of good and bad actions. And one aspect of this we can see in our day-to-day lives about how the actions we take lead to consequences for us. Although it can be complicated. Sometimes it seems like we do something that's supposed to be very skillful and good by Buddhist standards, but actually it seems like in the near term, things don't work out how we expected, and maybe we even seem like we're getting negative consequences from it. And so this kind of thing can be confusing. I think we've all had this kind of experience. And to some extent, we have to, over time, see what the long-term benefits are, which is really the point of view that the Buddha takes in the scriptures. So that's one recommendation with regard to that, if we look at that aspect of right view with the long term in mind. And the Buddha, with regard to the idea of whether or not the consequences of our actions we take in this life will affect us in future lives, he once told a group of very intelligent people, he said, you don't really know if there is a next life or not. But you can consider that if there really are the consequences of good and bad actions, and there is a next life, that you can see here in this life that by not doing evil things, it protects you from several problems. And so if you do refrain from evil, if you do good things, it will help you in this life. And if there is a next life, then it will be helpful for you in the next life as well. And so he took a very pragmatic approach to this. But you can see how there are many different aspects to right view. And some people will understand some aspects and have faith in some aspects at different points in their lives, and can even change their point of view also. But if we can develop our practice, over time we can come to see things for ourselves. And this is what it really takes to fully gain right view, to really know what the state of the situation is. And so we want to try to continuously practice and keep developing. So that, as the Buddha promised, as long as we practice correctly, the world will not be lacking for arhats. That it really all depends on the practice, and we all really can do it.
Okay, interesting. Here we have a slightly different type of question. The fifth commandment, Exodus 20:12, states, honor your father and your mother, but your days will increase. That your days will increase, I'm sorry. What do suttas say about this? Is there an obligation to do so? I actually remember, Ajahn, that one time you remarked that about the honoring the parents not being a precept in Buddhist system, being interesting. So yes, in Buddhism, in the Dhamma, honoring your parents is it's definitely stressed and put in a strong importance on, a strong emphasis on this aspect. So what do the suttas say about it? Is there an obligation? So I wouldn't say that there's an obligation, just like there's not an obligation to follow the precepts, but it's in your best interest, right? And in the interest of others. So if you don't want to suffer, then yes, there is. This is something that's important. But it's not like the Buddha is going around, sort of Bible, you know, yelling in the crowds that they need to honor their parents. He's just telling them that this is something that's very wholesome, something very beautiful, something that's very important, and something that's that everyone should do. So in that sense, it's a kind of obligation, but it's maybe a little bit different from a commandment, right? It's not coming from a kind of Buddha in the sky with a white beard, right? It's coming from a place of wisdom and compassion. So he wants people to understand that when they treat their parents well, they're cultivating very beautiful mind states. And when they treat their parents poorly, they're cultivating very harmful mind states, right? Very, very painful mind states. So it's coming from that place of wisdom and compassion. So that's the only difference I would make between like a commandment and a instruction, a training role, right? A kind of instruction and a encouragement, a strong encouragement, you could say. And so what did the suttas say? Well, they say, for example, that it's very, very difficult to repay your parents. And there's a very famous image of this about even carrying your parents on your shoulders for 100 years or their whole life, and still you wouldn't be able to repay them. But the only way to repay them is by establishing them in principles of Dhamma. So the Buddha puts a heavy emphasis on repaying the parents by honoring them in several ways. One is by establishing them in the qualities that they might not have yet, spiritual qualities that they might not have, right? So if the parents are not yet generous people, then we should try to encourage them to be generous. And if they're not yet ethical people, like following the 5 precepts or the 10 ways of wholesome action, then we should encourage them to follow ethical principles as well, on top of generosity. And then we should also encourage them in qualities like wisdom. We should try to get them to see the Dhamma, to understand the Dhamma, or to contemplate the Dhamma, and other qualities. So all of the good qualities of Dhamma, also faith, for example, is one. So there are certain qualities in Dhamma that the Buddha encourages establishing our parents in, and encouraging them to develop those qualities. Because the way that I take the kind of image here is that helping our parents physically, while it's something that we should do, something that's very good, it doesn't get them reward in the next life, right? Because the idea in Buddhism is that this human life is something very, very precious, and we wouldn't be able to have access to it if it weren't for our parents, right? And so the only way that we can repay our parents is by giving them the opportunity to have a human life, because that's what they gave us. And so, helping them in this human life, but then kind of letting them develop the qualities that lead to a lower life, that wouldn't really be repaying them. But if we establish them in the qualities that lead them to a human life or something higher than that, then that is repaying them for what they've offered us in the minimum, right? Other ways that the Buddha talked about repaying our parents is by offering things to them after they've passed away, and dedicating those offerings and the merit to them, right? So going to ascetics and contemplatives and priests and monks and bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and also if they're of another religion, you can also offer to the spiritual renunciants in their tradition. That's also okay. But offering to the Sangha is good if you're a Buddhist. And offering things like food and clothing and requisites and medicines and so on, and then doing it in their name and dedicating it in their name, and then sharing the merit of that giving with them. Because the Buddha was asked by a Brahmin, they actually have this ritual in Brahmanism, they had this ritual. And he asked, do they really get this stuff? Is this real, or are we just kind of offering these things for, in vain? And the Buddha says that they can receive it if they're in the Peta Loka, if they're in the realm of the hungry ghosts, or the ghosts, the departed spirits, that some of them, they actually subsist on gifts. So they don't, their food is actually only what's given by their relatives. It's not, they don't have other access to food to survive. And so we can also help them rejoice in wholesome spiritual qualities to have a nice next existence as well. So another way to repay our parents, even after they passed away, if you feel like, I could have done better, you can still actually offer things to them. You can still offer gifts and share merit with them and invite them to rejoice. And he said other things about parents. Like he said that people they have two deities in their house that you don't need to go to the temple to worship deities. You have them in your house. They're called your parents. And so that's another kind of very strong image that he gave of like really the reverence that we have towards our parents can be very strong, very just very powerful feeling. And yeah, I think maybe that's enough words for me on this topic. Maybe Yajin, did you have some other words on the topic of parents?
Maybe one quick thing I noticed. I didn't know about this teaching from the Bible, but it immediately struck me that we have a common saying coming from the suttas about honoring our elders in general. And it's so similar. For one, whoever honors the elders, 4 are the qualities that will increase: long life, beauty, pleasure, and power. And so the long life here, I didn't know about this teaching from the 5th commandment. Honor your father and your mother, that your days will increase. So we have a similarity there in the terms of the results.
Good point. Okay, let's just take a check here at the questions. Let me know if you need to skip it. Okay. Amit asks, how do we dig out anger and hidden anger?
Well, sure. So to dig it out completely, which is what ideally our goal would be, it would require following the path to enlightenment. Technically speaking, you might say at least to the point of anagami, but preferably all the way to enlightenment. Once you get to anagami, you're at the 3rd level of sainthood, and so just one more level of sainthood attaining enlightenment, and then you're also able to dig out other things as well and attain total satisfaction. And so, yes, anger is one of what's called the defilements of mind, and in the Buddhist practice, we're aiming to eradicate these from the heart. And so the practice is keeping precepts and practicing meditation, founded in right view, about the fact that anger comes from within. Anger is difficult to bear in and of itself, and actually it leads us to further unskillful action, and cause a lot of problems for us and for others. There are other qualities we can cultivate, or that we should cultivate as well, in addition to the path factors I was just talking about, in terms of keeping precepts and acting morally, you might say, and developing meditation and wisdom, because there are other qualities that we need to kind of to have in place so we can develop the path to enlightenment. So, for example, faith and generosity and morality, and or kind of an aspect of self-control, around morality, and wisdom, and so there's quite a lot to talk about there, but that's the basic idea, with the path and then the prerequisites, as they call them, those 4 other qualities that I mentioned.
And Ajahn, it looks like we only have 6 or 7 minutes, so I thought maybe we could prioritize the questions that haven't been asked. People haven't asked.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Rick has a question. He says, just wants to offer feedback. Highly value the more in-depth way you explore the topic and share your reflections on the questions. Your teachings and compassion are of great benefit.
Oh, great.
Oh, sadhu. It's very kind of you, Rick. And he asks, I have been experiencing real loss due to my chronic illness getting worse, getting older and less able to take care of responsibilities. How do we know what things to let go and which things to work hard to keep as important parts of our lives? Okay, so yeah, less able to take care of your responsibilities. So I would say, of course, the first one that we want to really protect and cherish is our Dhamma practice, right? A responsibility to our virtue and our conduct and our development of the mind, right? So, even if you maybe you're put in a situation where maybe it's difficult to uphold, you have a choice between upholding certain moral principles and maybe an easier route, then of course your priority would be your Dhamma practice and protecting your mind, protecting that aspect, because even as our body might deteriorate, we can still try to develop our mind to the best of our ability, even though it often, as you probably, I'm sure you're aware, it gets much more difficult sometimes, right, with pain and so forth. So, and also loss. So yeah, really using it as a supportive condition to work with the First Noble Truth, and take that as a priority, right? To the best of your ability, of saying, okay, this is a responsibility. And then to me, one thing that comes to mind, at least in terms of which things to let go and work harder to keep, is to reflect also on death, and to think, what do I want to remember? What do I want to feel like? I'm glad that I did that. I'm glad that I protected this. And what things would I feel like um, I wish I spent more time on something else, right? And kind of maybe getting a basic idea of just, oh, okay, if the end were to come at some point, I would want this to be, I really care about this, right? Maybe there are people you want to get in touch with and talk to, or amends you want to make, or certain, yeah, just accomplishments that you still can do that you feel would be wholesome, and make your life feel very complete and full and beautiful at the end. And then you can kind of assess, like, oh, these other things that I'm doing, or maybe even people that you feel obligated to work with. You might think like, oh, I feel like I'm wasting my time. I feel like I'm going to regret spending time on those people, and making my mind more difficult, when really there's these other things that I want to do. And so maybe it's worth assessing, oh, towards the end, I feel like this is what really matters to me. And so then you have that treasure trove. And we don't know when the end might come naturally, but at least we can kind of prepare ourselves by upholding the Dhamma practice, by keeping our morals, and then really directing our mind towards beautiful qualities that we know will make our mind bright and clear and happy, instead of making us feel regret and remorse at what we didn't want to do. That's one way maybe to measure for yourself.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
Okay.
Good luck, Rick.
Okay, here's one here. Ajahn Chah prefers to use the word wisdom instead of vipassana. I guess maybe he didn't speak English, so panya instead of vipassana. What are your thoughts on this preference, and how might this substitution affect the quality of attention during meditation and insight practices? I think this will be our last question, Ajahn, so feel free to.
Okay, so great, very, very interesting question. And all right. So I'm thinking about what kind of a difference there might be. Of course, the Ajahn Chah he taught for many years, and thinking about his use of these terms in different situations. So, and also when we talk about how might this affect the quality of attention during meditation and insight practices. That insight practices actually, there are many different kinds of insight practices, and the term means different things to different people. So the kind of the overall way that Ajahn Chah used to teach was you said you really want to make sure you get your sila in place. So your precepts. So for lay people, it would be you want to have your 5 precepts in place. And then he would encourage the lay people to practice the Uposita day. In Thai, it's called One Prat, the holy day, where you take a day off from everything else and you devote yourself to spiritual practice, following the 8 precepts. And then you want to work on your mindfulness, so that you develop your mindfulness through formal meditation and through all of your activities, to the point where it becomes seamless. A common metaphor in the Ajahn Chah tradition is of a drippy faucet. If your mindfulness is only coming out in drops, it isn't quite good, and it isn't good enough yet to really see reality, to gain awakening. You want the drops to steadily become more and more frequent as you practice more and more over time, until it becomes, you have a steady stream of water coming out of the faucet, out of the metaphorical faucet. And when your mindfulness is seamless, when it's continuous, then you can see life as it really is. You can see the change happening in life, the impermanence. And that's what will help your heart to let go. Now, sometimes it can be difficult, and for many of us, we find it difficult to achieve this. It can take quite a bit of practice and devotion, and putting a lot of effort into the practice was something that Ajahn Chah emphasized as well. It was quite common in his monasteries that one day a week, all of the monastics would stay up all night meditating even. So they'd practice throughout the day, and then they'd practice all night. And then the next day go about the regular duties and activities. So they devote an extra several hours to the practice once a week this way. And lay people from the local village would come into the monastery also, and they'd practice with the monks all night. And this was something that he extolled, was putting a lot of effort into the practice so that you can get your mindfulness continuous, in this way. But it can be difficult, and so sometimes there are things we have to let go of as well. And we can use our panya, our wisdom, which also is used in Thai to mean intelligence. It's kind of our intelligence, and is commonly used to not only in the sense of wisdom, things that we already know, but using our ability to investigate and use our intelligence actively to see what things are like, And so we would use our contemplative abilities to look into things that we're holding on to, things that are bothering us, things that are preventing us from being mindful, and this kind of thing, and see how to let go of them with the principles primarily of anicca dukkha anatta. Is noticing that this is impermanent, noticing that it's causing problems for us, it's suffering, and that it's not ultimately satisfying. And then because of this, it's also not self. It's not something that we should identify with or hold on to. Thinking this is mine, this kind of thing. It isn't worthy of that, and it isn't really true. And so we can use our wisdom in this way. And then once we get the mindfulness very steady and very, very, very continuous, and we're seeing the impermanence in life and so on, we want to have this right view, this intelligence. This is one way of understanding wisdom or panya. This right view with the mindfulness is kind of fortified with this right view, that not only are we directly experiencing life, but we're experiencing it from the point of view of this is impermanent. The things that are happening are impermanent, and that any suffering and attachment I'm feeling is all coming from within. So see things basically in terms of the Four Noble Truths, and that letting go will be to our benefit. And so that's that kind of in a summary way, is a way of talking about how you use wisdom in the practice of making the mind calm and investigating, as I understand it, in the kind of the teachings of Ajahn Chah.
Thank you, Ajahn. Okay. And it looks like we are all finished for this monk chat. I just noticed Rob from England asked this morning, so I hope he. Thank you for communicating his question, Lydia, and I hope he has a great stay at the monastery. Rob, if you watch this later, and maybe we'll say goodbye to everybody. John, would you like to say goodbye?
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, we didn't take any questions from the people here. And we do have one. Oh, okay. Well, we should give Vanessa an opportunity. Thank you. So
I wonder, Ajahn, if maybe we should sign off first, because it's 1:33, and then take the question. Do you think? Or
okay.
We could.
Okay, sure. If that's better, good.
Yeah. Or we can leave it, I guess.
Okay.
So maybe people are interested.
Okay.
In the live stream, yeah.
I have 2 questions. That's okay.
Okay.
Should I limit it to some?
No, that's okay. Go ahead, sure.
Okay, so my first question was relating back to like our parents and like offerings to hungry ghosts and things like that. Based on this, technically, if we're humans, then if we're humans in this life, is it a possibility that our kids from like our past life are offering to us, like currently, and then do those like offerings transfer?
Yes, actually. Yeah. Okay. So this is a good question. It could be a question of interest here. I suspect, though, I kind of dawned on me why Iowata was recommending maybe we should sign off first. And so, if I may say so, maybe that some of the people who are tuned in remotely need to go, but they'd like to have a sense of closure that we've kind of formally ended the program. And so I'd like to invite anyone who is I'd like to anumotana the Dhamma practice of those who tuned in, your interest in the Dhamma. And so we understand we're going over time. So if anyone would like to sign off, we'll say we've also got in-person Dhamma events coming up Saturday night from 6 to 7:30, and on Sunday from 1 to 4. And of course, the live streams resuming on Wednesday. You see the schedule on the website. And best wishes to you all. Hope you all prosper in the Dhamma. And anyone who would like to stay on, we're going to do a couple more questions from Vanessa, one of the yogis here. And so you're welcome for this extra bonus, 2 questions to the chat. Right. And so the question about is it possible that our children from a past life might be making offerings on our behalf and sharing merit? And theoretically, right, it is, yes, and other people, friends and relatives might be. It can even happen within this life. This actually happened to Ajahn Chah, where his relatives thought that he died. Because he'd been away as a monk for so long, and he's wandering in the wilderness by himself. And he actually got malaria, unbeknownst to his family. His family didn't know about any of this, but he was out in the wilderness by himself, and he got malaria. And he was very, very sick. And he had such a high fever that he passed out. And so he woke up from having passed out, so much to his surprise, so refreshed later on. And feeling healthy again. And it was such a night and day difference from when he was sick, and he couldn't understand it. And so he was really, really mystified by it, but very happy, of course. But he made a note of it in his diary with the date and everything, and it described his experience. And sometime later, he actually did go back to his home village and was reunited with his relatives. And they were overjoyed because they thought he'd passed away. They hadn't heard from him in so long, So after some time being together, he remembered about this strange event. So he broke out his diary and he looked it up with the date and everything. And he asked him, did anything special happen on this day? Something really special happened to me. Did anything special happen on this day? And they thought about it and they realized, yes, that was the day. We thought you died. And so we went to the local temple. And we made merit, we made offerings and we shared the merit with you, because we thought you were dead. And so this is one of the disciples of Ajahn Chah shared this story as an example of how sharing merit actually has benefit. And even if you haven't passed on, it can have benefit for you. It was luck for Ajahn Chah that I came at a time in his life when he was really sick. So they say one of the benefits of receiving merit from others is it actually can cure you of an illness, actually, if someone shares enough merit with you as well. It also depends on on how calm the heart of those sharing the merit is. So the calmer their hearts are, the more efficacious the merit sharing is. Yeah. And so when if someone's sharing merit with someone and the person they're sharing merit with is actually a ghost, because this is what they say, this is the way it seems, is that because the bodies of ghosts are basically composed of energy, it's a very subtle kind of body. It's also very, very changeable. And so if someone shares a lot of merit with them, they can actually gain a new rebirth right away from that. So they could even be reborn as a Dewa, for example. Yeah. Human beings wouldn't experience something like that, but they can experience something even very profound internally. They can even affect their health in the way I just described. So they might experience, in terms of other things, they might experience like rapture, or they might experience that the mind becomes very calm, very pleasantly calm, or they may experience more mental power, something like this. And so if you ever find yourself, or maybe really little happiness, if you ever find yourself really happy, I've wondered about this myself before. I can't say I know, but times in my life when I felt really happy, I didn't know why. No apparent reason. And so now in my later years, I wonder if somebody somewhere shared some merit with me and I didn't know about it. I've had experiences, I dare say, after I learned about merit sharing and living in monasteries where other monastics Yeah, I'll even go one further. This is a really special bonus here. I'll tell you more about this. That actually some of the other monks and I, we kind of tested this out a little bit, So yeah, I remember talking about merit with some of my friend monks, and then having, later on at some point, having some really special experience. And when I say we tested this out, we didn't actually have like an agreement to do this or anything like this, But then this thing started happening, and more of the monks got interested in this. And I started noticing sometimes after talking with monks about sharing merit, I'd have some kind of really special experience, and I'd pay attention. When did that happen? I'd sometimes be really mystified, kind of like Ajahn Chah. And then I'd stop thinking about, well, when did that happen? And I might talk to one of the monks again the next day, call him up, and say, hey, after a few times of this happening, I got a little bit more courageous. And I'd ask him like right up, so did you share merit with me last night after we were talking? And they say, actually, Wade, I actually did. This kind of thing went on, and it really seemed hard to deny. I remember once I was with a couple of other monks. There were three of us, and one of the monks was complaining. We'd been on a long trip, and it was getting late at night after we got to a monastery we were going to, and we were sitting through these long ceremonies. And he was complaining. He was so tired, and he just wanted to go back to the dormitory and rest and so on like this. Well, then one of the group shared merit with him, and he didn't know about it. And after a few minutes, he kind of perks up and he starts getting animated, and then he starts talking about, I'm experiencing rapture. Like spontaneously, he starts exclaiming, and he's talking about this for a few hours. And so an hour, 2 hours later, we're walking back to the dorms after the ceremony. I am feeling so much rapture. What is going on? And so he was up kind of late that night. The rest of us are getting ready to go to sleep, and he's like, wow, this is such a great experience. He didn't know what was going on, but someone in the group was sharing merit with him. Just a few minutes later, he started experiencing the payoff. And so I've become a real believer in this kind of thing myself. And so they say that we should make a habit of sharing merit with our parents and other relatives, and share merit also with those who have that we've harmed in the past. They say that the heart is such that even if we don't know who they are, even if it's beings we've harmed in past lives, that our heart will know who they are. And that we can do that. We can simply make a determination that may any beings that have ever harmed share in all the merit I've made, of all the goodness I've done, that they actually can share in that merit. And this can resolve the karmic debts that we have with them. And it can help them. And an especially good time to do it is after we've meditated, for example, because then the heart will be calmer. And we've just made a lot of merit from meditating. And so take an opportunity to share merit. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
My other question is completely unrelated. But I wanted to ask, as a layperson specifically, how can we best deal with the need to accumulate wealth to sustain ourselves, on like the anxiety of having security with wealth, while also finding like the boundary between like greed, especially when we're trying to accumulate wealth, not necessarily like just for ourselves, but for merit or sharing with the community, doing like good deeds, etc.
Yeah. That's such a great question. I'm so glad that we took it, because that's a great question that affects so many people and everyone has to grapple with, And I think the kind of the simplest kind of simple cogent answer is to develop a sense of what the Thais call podi. They actually, the late king of Thailand, he developed this as a principle for their economic development, the principle of sufficiency economy. And so he tried to remind people over the years, about what's really important in life. And that the suffering involved in trying to amass wealth and having a lot of unnecessary material goods and so on like this, the suffering involved in trying to attain status also and maintain status and so on, and to focus on isn't it isn't it better really to have a sense of what's actually good enough? And if we focus on just that, what's good enough, then how much less we'll need to work in life, and how much less stress we'll have, and also how much time we'll have to put into other things that also are important to us, like spiritual practice, or spending time with family, and other so many other kinds of things that add quality to our lives, enrich our lives. And for everybody's going to be a little bit different. Everyone has to kind of set their own standards and think about what's enough for them, what's podi, what's good enough for them. But just that, pausing sometimes and considering that can make a big difference, I think. If you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, I think, Ajahn, you were a layperson longer than I was. I don't know if I have much economic advice. Yeah.
I think being sensitive to what happens in your life. I practiced the religious observance day for many years in my life. So I set aside one day each week to practice meditation and focus on spiritual life. And I found that this kind of limited me in other ways. Of course, it had an impact on my social life, and it had an impact on also my career life and so on. Other kinds of activities I could do. And I think we all have to learn over time what's right for us, and also if we kind of experiment with life and the different things we do in life, what brings suffering and what relieves suffering. After several years I had this as a fixed part of my life, the religious observance day that I cherished very much. But over time, after about a decade of doing this, I kind of wanted to explore other avenues of life as well. And I got more involved in romantic affairs, and I started doing volunteer activities that were very important to me. And I also started working a lot more, and I started making a lot more money. But after a few years of this, in achieving things that were some things that were very satisfying and gratifying, some things that weren't very gratifying and satisfying after all. I found that my life was very rich in some ways, but I felt kind of starved emotionally. I felt like I was kind of starving spiritually. And not too long after that phase of my life, I ended up going to the monasteries, which had been my long-term plan anyway, and ordaining as a monk. And looking back on that change over time, I came to think, there was part of me that kind of had to do that. I had to go through that phase where I was doing a lot of different things and experiencing a lot more in life. But I also learned that the value of, and even if I hadn't gone into the monasteries, I would have gone back to doing a religious observance day, pairing other things out of my life again, in the search for more satisfying life. Really, This has to be part of life too, is kind of experimenting and seeing what happens, seeing what are the cause and effect relationships, what are the results. So. Sure. Should we go for a triple bonus? Question. Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, we got someone said, nice to hear extra questions and answers, and sadhu for overtime. So I think that some of them were happy, and I noticed that there's still 23 people. So
okay.
Happy everybody was happy. So sadhu to all of you for joining and hearing Dhamma. We will see you at the next live streams or in-person events.